Assetto Corsa nowadays has become a sim of contrasts. This game is 10 years old this year. It's no longer supported by its developer. There are many more simulators that have come to market since 2014 that in some ways are objectively better when we want to look at things like graphics, career mode, default sounds, playability, in terms of how accessible are things like in-game menus. If you want to get into the minutiae of that, we could be here forever. Yet at the same time, despite now being pretty old as far as computer software goes, particularly in the game arena, Assetto Corsa continues to have quite the large fan base and user base. And this is due in no small part to the contributions of the privateer third-party modding community. When this game launched in Steam Early Access, we only had a handful of cars and tracks to play with. And it didn't even run on a lot of popularly available consumer-level machines at the time because, well, it is pretty graphics intensive, all things considered. Nowadays, perhaps that's changed a bit. However, Assetto Corsa, as we see it today, bears very little resemblance to the game that launched in Steam Early Access, and that is simply because of a very passionate and able and resourceful community that continues to support this game and continues to give it infinite replay value that keeps us coming back time and time again. One of the greatest supporters of Assetto Corsa, in my estimation, have been Race Sim Studio. This little privateer modding group out of England put themselves on the map and set the world alight in 2017 with the release of their first public car, Race Sim Studio's Formula Hybrid 2017. Since then, they have continued to go from strength to strength, improving and developing the Formula Hybrid series, as well as bringing several other types of cars from various racing disciplines past and present to Assetto Corsa, all the while pushing the sim overall forward, integrating different technologies and different software developments that have been coming from both themselves as well as others, integrating many features of their cars in with the custom shaders patch, which has since become basically a must-have for any Assetto Corsa install. Today, Race Sim Studio, they continue to go from strength to strength with improving and expanding their Race Sim Studio Classics line with this car, RSS Formula 1986 V6. This car is not quite a ground-up interpretation of a Formula One car from the 1986 zenith of the turbo era, but it is, of course, done in a 100% authentic and competent manner from our friends over at Race Sim Studio, and it has very quickly become one of the most profound experiences I have ever had in my 22 years of sim racing. Therefore, this car, I think, represents a true zenith, an inflection point, if you will, in what we can expect moving forward from Assetto Corsa. Despite this sim no longer being supported by its developer, and despite it now being 10 years old in terms of when we were first able to get our hands on it, it continues to get better and better, itself moving from strength to strength. This time, though, no longer because of the efforts of its developers, who were developing it and then releasing it for commercial profit, but at the hands and hearts of the privateer, passionate sim racing community who, sometimes acting for profit, yes, as they rightfully should, but at the end of the day, who are acting in our best interest. We love sim racing. We love the ability to put ourselves in places and positions and even sometimes time and space that we cannot and will not ever occupy. It gives us just a little glimpse into what it might be like if the universe played out a little bit differently and we ourselves got to become racing drivers in our favorite eras, in our favorite disciplines. That's what Race Sim Studio have attempted to give us with every product that they've released, but in particular, this one, RSS Formula 1986 V6. It really does give a window into a glorious past, and for a brief moment, just perhaps as you're rowing through the gears in this glorious Assetto Corsa mod, you might just half believe that you yourself might be a Formula One star from the turbo era. Let's take a look at this glorious machine. Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Welcome back to Assetto Corsa, and welcome to Formula RSS 1986 V6. From our wonderful people over at Race Sim Studio, we have yet another addition to the Race Sim Studio's Classics line. This is a lineup of cars that I consider to be Halo projects. Of course, Race Sim Studio, they have made their name and their fame with Assetto Corsa modding via their Formula Hybrid line, which they have given us every year since 2017, bringing us their ground-up interpretation of current year Formula 1 technical regulations with an original design every year. And we absolutely love them for Formula Hybrid because it is the closest that we can really get in sim racing, with a few very notable but rare exceptions, to getting a real first-hand, one-on-one experience of what modern Formula 1 is like to interface with, to drive, experience the performance, and all that kind of thing. However, that same know-how and that same commitment to delivering a fantastic product has also been applied throughout the years to a few other realms of open-wheel racing. Of course, Race Sim Studio also have made their lion's share of tin tops, and they're all fantastic as well. But as far as the open wheel lineup goes from Race Sim Studio, they also have what has become their Classics line, and probably still the centerpiece of the Classics line is now a 5-year-old car, is it? Formula RSS 2000 V10. It was a recreation as close as they could get in terms of technical ability as well as legal ability to the Ferrari F1 2000 Formula 1 car, the car that returned Michael Schumacher to the World Championship, returned Ferrari to holding the driver's crown for the first time since, what was it, 1979, something like that. So a historic car. They did a wonderful job emulating that thing inside and out. The performance of it, the way that it handles, the sounds, all of that. They brought that car to life and gave it to us in Assetto Corsa. I remember Christmas Day 2018 is when we got that particular car. They followed it up, though, with a few other installments in what has become the classic line. We've got Formula 1979 V8, which is effectively a Lotus 79 clone, also done absolutely tremendously well. We've also more recently gotten Formula 2013 V8, which is a 2012-2013 ground-up design for that era Formula 1 car, with the V8 engine revving to 18,000 RPM. Sounds glorious, it drives even better, fantastic car. We've also got a couple more, probably most closely related to this one. We have got Formula 1990 V12. That is, as near as makes no difference, to the Ferrari 641. The Ferrari Formula 1 car from the 1990 season. That car came to us in 2020. Remember when that one came out, and it was absolutely wonderful, and it still is today. However, this one is a bit different yet again. Despite being from 1986, and in terms of the installments here in the RSS Classics line, this is the closest chronologically that we have ever had in this line between two editions. We've got Formula 1970 V8, which is a March 701, and then we have got Formula 1979 V8, which is a Lotus 79. However, those cars are 8 years apart, pretty much. This car, Formula RSS 1986, is only 4 years removed from RSS Formula 1990 V12. Now, why would it behoove these guys to give us two cars that are relatively close in chronology here? How much different could things really have been over 4 years? Now, barring some of the larger regulation changes that we have seen in more recent times in Grand Prix racing, say, for example, the change from 2021 to 2022, that was pretty earth-shattering in terms of the way that the cars looked and the manner in which they derived their performance. So there are exceptions to this rule, but 4 years? Really? 86 to 90? How much different could things really have been? Well, you're really talking night and day. What do we have going on here? Well, on this car that we see before us, well, first of all, it's got the wonderful Race Sim Studio fit, finish, and presence. It is a fantastically done 3D model. What of that 3D model? Well, we are looking here at 149 objects, and those 149 objects are composed of, per Content Manager, 315,947 triangles, and they are thereby composing 49 distinct materials. So 149 individually modeled objects here with 315,947 triangles, or polygons, whatever you want to call them. That's the level of detail that we're talking about here. It is not the most detailed 3D model that Race Sim Studio have ever done in terms of raw polygon count. However, it is right up there with all of the other ones that we have seen from these guys in terms of the way that it looks and the way that it presents here in showroom, as well as later on when we see it out on track. It is absolutely a sight to behold. 49 materials on it as well. Those are things like, of course, the paints, the finishes, the rubber, the steel, the carbon fiber, things like that. The distinct visual elements that you will see, many of them are comprised of different materials. So they have gone through the trouble of modeling all of that in terms of the reflectivities of given material properties and things like that. It looks absolutely tremendous. What else do we have here, though? Well, relative to, say, the 1990 car, that is a naturally aspirated V12 car with a semi-automatic gearbox, 7-speed unit in that. Fantastic driving experience, about 680 horsepower or so. Really, we should expect something similar, given that this is actually 4 years older than that car, right? So this one should be even slower. No. What's really going on here? Well, this is Formula One's turbo era. Those of you who know, you already know. Those of you who don't know, well, this is what this car is really meant to give you. In the back of this car, we have got a 1.5-liter V6, so actually a little bit smaller in terms of displacement relative to a modern 2023 Formula One engine. However, what is it? It's a 1.5-liter V6, double overhead cam, 4 valves per cylinder. All of that sounds absolutely conventional, and we would see that in modern Formula One engine. Yes, we in fact do. However, we have not one, but 2 turbochargers feeding that V6 engine. And that means that we are producing about 500 horsepower before we actually spool the turbos up. 1,200 horsepower at 12,000 RPM is what this thing is rated at per Content Manager, and believe me, when you have it out on track, you really believe that you have got that much power underneath your right foot. 778 Newton meters of torque at about 10,000 RPM, so not only does the thing get up and go, but it also moves the world around behind it. So you have got tremendous horsepower, and it comes on so explosively. That maximum torque figure at 10,000 RPM, maximum horsepower at about 12,000 RPM, with a red line coming at about 12.4, 12.5. So you are using almost the entirety of the rev range before you get to that maximum power output. So this is an incredibly peaky engine, but it's also an incredibly torquey one. You've got the better part of 800 Newton meters of torque, and that's very high in the rev range as well. So when you drive this thing, and we'll get into some of the market differences in terms of how you drive a car like this versus, say, a normally aspirated one like the 1990 car, you will really see that you have night and day differences. Another night and day difference in this car relative to the one that's 4 years its junior, this car has a 6-speed gearbox, but it's a manual gearbox. Yep, shift it yourself, 6-speed H pattern there. You've got a little lever on the right-hand side of the bulkhead. That's how you are transmitting that engine power and that engine torque to your driven axle, which of course is the rear axle. So you do not have any flappy paddles, you do not have any auto shift capability or anything like that. Everything that this car does is a direct result of the inputs that it receives from its driver, which means that if, for whatever reason, you're not getting on very well with this thing, well, you need to take a look in the mirror, because there are no filters, you cannot hide. If you're good, this car will reward you. If you're not so good, this car will humiliate you in front of the whole world. How does it do that? Well, it does it very quickly. It weighs 610 kilograms, which gives us, at 1,200 horsepower, power-to-weight ratio of 0.51 kilograms per horsepower. So yeah, you have got about 1.5% in terms of how much more power do you have over how much weight do you have there. So factor of 1.5. So roughly you have got, 2 horsepower per kilogram, something like that. Yeah, it's absolutely insane. Means a much greater than 1-to-1 power-to-weight ratio. Modern Formula One cars are around about there, I would say, but of course, we don't have those power figures with us in the modern day, so we can only speculate. However, what that does mean is that, yeah, all the way up in 6th gear, even when you've lengthened the gearbox, even when you have a lot of downforce on this thing, it is still pulling all the way down the straight. Every time you get to a braking zone in this car, you almost lament it a little bit, because you know it can go even faster. I have yet to max it out, and I'm talking about maxing it out down the longest straight at Monza. So yeah, This thing has a lot of power. It is not very draggy. It is quite slippery in a straight line. It's quite slippery everywhere, actually. The thing is dancing all the time with that massive torque, even with those huge slick tires. Yeah, you had better be on it, because this thing will absolutely let you know what the time of day is, especially if you don't work yourself up to it and learn how the car works, make sure the tires are ready, make sure the brakes are up, because, yeah, any little weakness that you have, this car will exploit it. However, this car being part of the RSS Classics line, we mentioned that the other installments of this line, for the most part, with the exception of F13, have a real-world analog that they were based on. This car is no different. In the real world, the inspiration for Formula RSS 1986 V6 is actually the Williams FW11. For those of you who don't know, the Williams FW11 is one of the real titans of the turbo era. This car made its debut with Williams Grand Prix engineering for the 1986 season, and it was designed, led anyway, by Frank Durney and Patrick Head. This was the Williams-Honda days. Yes, Honda. They are a powerhouse currently in Formula One, but they really had their start in the sport back in the 1960s. But in the 1980s, they really made a name for themselves in the turbo era with their V6 engines. And this car here, the Williams FW11 in the real world, was absolutely no exception to that general trend. The FW11, as we actually knew it in the real world, designed and built by Williams Grand Prix Engineering in Grove in the UK and powered by Honda over from Japan. Specifically, that engine, the Honda engine in the back of this car, was the Honda Type RA166E, 1.5 liters displacement at 4 valves per cylinder, twin turbo, 4-bar boost pressure. Bar is atmosphere. Bar and atmosphere are the same thing. So 4 times atmospheric pressure. You can do the math converting from 14.7 in pounds per square inch if you want to figure out what the factor is there. But yeah, 4 bar boost pressure at full boost from those twin turbos on that RA166E engine for 1986. Overall specifications, though, in terms of dimensions on the 1986 version of FW11, because there also was an FW11B for the 1987 season. So it's one of those Formula One cars that served more than just 1 year. Suspension on the car, double wishbones and push rods, actuating dampers there mounted on top of the chassis in front and on top of the gearbox casing in the back. That suspension done in steel. The chassis, though, carbon fiber monocoque, just like you would see today. Remember, the carbon composite revolution in Formula One was not all that old by the time we get to 1986. McLaren on the MP4-1 in the 1981 season, they debuted the carbon fiber monocoque in Grand Prix racing, and by the time 1986 rolled around, everybody realized, oh, wait, it's 5 times stronger than steel and at least 3 times as stiff. Yeah, we're going to be using it for the same weight, if not even less. So carbon fiber was in motorsport, full stop, by this point. Williams, of course, were using it on FW11 and FW11B. Dimensionally, though, on the car, the axle track there on the front axle, 1,803 millimeters or bang on 71 inches. On the rear axle, 1,651 millimeters or bang on 65 inches. The car would become 1 inch narrower, both front and rear, for 1987, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that was a regulatory change. The wheelbase on this car in 1986 was 2,794 millimeters, or bang on 110 inches. The car would gain 2 inches in wheelbase for 1987. The engine, as we mentioned, was the Honda RA166E. 1987 was the RA167E. Again, twin turbo V6 at 90 degrees. Transmission, Williams and Hewland coming together to design a 6-speed manual box. As we mentioned, that is replicated here on Formula 1986. And the weight there, as far as is credited here, according to the FW11, was 540 kilograms. Compare that to the 610 kilograms that we are quoted here from Racing Studio in Content Manager. The only team that entered FW11 or FW11B was Williams Honda, and it was driven by Nigel Mansell, Nelson Piquet, and Riccardo Patrese in 1986. For Mansell and Piquet, and Patrese drove the car in 1987. The car made its debut at the 1986 Brazilian Grand Prix, which it won. It won its final Grand Prix in Mexico in 1987, and its last Grand Prix entry was the 1987 Australian Grand Prix. With 32 races entered, it won 18 of them, took pole position for 16 of them, and set fastest lap in 17 of them. It took 2 Constructors' Championships in 1986 and 1987, and 1 Drivers' Championship in 1987 for Nelson Piquet. However, everybody knows the very famous "and it's Mansell" exclamation from Murray Walker at the 1986 Australian Grand Prix at Adelaide, where Nigel Mansell lost his rear tire down the straight, highest speed portion of the circuit, shower of sparks, the tire goes bang, and it flails around at the back of the car. Nigel Mansell probably should have won the 1986 Drivers' Championship, which would have given this car 2 for 2 twice over. However, be that as it may, history is what it is. 2 Constructors' Championships, but just 1 Drivers' Championship for the FW11 and FW11B. So then, we've gone through what the car is in Assetto Corsa, we've gone through what the car was in reality. What does it look like? Why are we here? Why is this thing so exciting to me? Well, let's stop our rotation here and just get into it straight away. Have a look at this thing. Of course, this is old news if you are familiar with Race Sim Studios' portfolio, because everything they give us looks absolutely fantastic, and it looks absolutely fantastic from all and any angles. Even when you get up close, I mean, look at that shut line between the lower section of the nose and the upper section of the nose. It's like, okay, you're never going to look at the car from this close in, but when you do, yeah, you see that things look pretty good. And you also see that the reflections are still pretty good, all things considered. That's fantastic to see there. Technically speaking, what do we have here? And of course, all of this analysis also applies to the FW11 in the real world, but we've got a very simplistic single main plane front wing with an upper flap. And you can see that upper flap here. We have got our adjuster holes on the side of the nose. That is obviously going to be securing the nose when we make our flap adjustments, and you can just see the slot here with a little set screw that enables the flap to move up and down if you so want it to do, and you can see it doing that right here. Absolutely amazing to see that detail here in showroom, and when we make our angle of attack adjustments on our front flap in the pits here, when we go to in-game, you'll be able to see that angle of attack change visually as well. So that looks absolutely amazing. Another fantastic little detail there from Race Sim Studio. They're not unique in doing this on a lot of their mods, nor is this car unique to Race Sim Studio with including this detail, but they have included it with this car, and it is definitely appropriate. Coming toward the rear here, relatively speaking, you can see double wishbone push rod suspension, but done in steel. We are before the days of carbon suspensions like you would see nowadays in Formula One. This is all done in steel, but it is nicely finished here. It almost looks like it's been blued, almost like a gunmetal bluing there, but looks fantastic, and obviously highly reflective as well. You can see the geometries, how everything has been crafted there, really handcrafted in terms of the way that Race Sim Studio do their 3D rendering. Looks fantastic, and of course you can see plainly what the suspension is doing. The suspension pickup points where they join up with the chassis, you can see the blocks there where it goes into the carbon monocoque. All of these things are bonded into, well, they're bolted into threads that are then bonded into the monocoque. But you can see how all of that works. So very, very nice. Going into the wheel hub there, the upright, behind the brake duct, which is itself pretty massive. You can see that the brake duct goes inside there, and then it's feeding air into the wheel hub, which is in turn going to be cooling the brake. There you go. We are starting to see carbon discs here. You can see that they are ventilated and cross-drilled, and they've got that mottled appearance. So this tells me that we're dealing with carbon discs at this point. There is our massive brake caliper. Looks like we have got just a single pad, but we've probably got at least 4 pistons in this caliper, maybe more. I'm not entirely sure what Williams would have been using or how often they changed that specification, but you can see where the caliper is, and you can see the brake pad as well. You can also see, if we can get a better angle on it, yeah, you can even see the pad material. That's absolutely wild. I know the brakes on my everyday driver are not nearly that thick. I probably should address that. Probably should address that rather, but that's so cool. There's the little nipple on top for bleeding the brakes. That's something that anybody who's ever worked on a car can tell you what it is instantaneously. That's cool. And then, of course, it's all behind the wheel. Very nicely done. RSX Classics branding on it. Looks fantastic. There's the wheel nut with the paint chips that show that it has been used aplenty. Fantastic stuff. Pulling out, there is our Good Times tire. Hawk is the model number or model name on that tire. And then we've got some paint or chalk marks on them. Set 27, whatever 4440 means. Cool. Really, really cool. We don't have any embossed lettering on this. Sometimes Race Sim Studio give us embossed lettering on their tire sidewalls. They've chosen not to do that this time. It hardly matters. It doesn't really matter at all. But looks really good. Obviously, Good Times is a play on the real-world tire manufacturer, Goodyear. Cool. Coming up to the nose, you can see here we have got the Race Sim Studio logo and a few somewhat lower resolution sponsor graphics here, all fictional sponsors, of course. Well, not all fictional sponsors, but mostly fictional sponsors here. Precise Pedal, Revival, Digital would have been the real-world analog of this. You saw this on some Ferraris in the air. Not entirely sure what Digital actually was, but I assume it was some sort of computer or telecommunications company. Regardless, you can see this set screw, grub screw, whatever you want to call it. This is partially what's holding the nose on. Cool. And then we get into the monocoque proper here. There was no such thing as a standardized monocoque length or height or nose height, anything like that in this era, so this is the union between monocoque here, screen left, and removable bodywork, screen right. Very, very cool. But when we come up into the monocoque, you can see a couple of things that look somewhat familiar. This hatch right here would be removable, and the footwell is underneath that, so the mechanics can get in there and make some adjustments in the footwell. Also, these two little blisters on either side of the monocoque. That's obviously for housing the mounting hardware for the front suspension, as well as some of the dampers underneath here. So obviously, the mechanics would go in there, they'd remove this screw, and then they'd be removing that section of bodywork there, just covering over these little blisters, these fairings for probably where the dampers are. Also right here, little antenna. Computer technology on these cars was very low tech, but it did exist. So this antenna probably had a couple of functions. One was radio antenna for the car-to-pit radio, but also these cars were sending some rudimentary telemetry back to the pits. And again, 1986, personal computers were a thing. The internet was not quite a thing, but it was getting there. And of course, we had CDs and cassettes and all sorts of things going on. So the digital revolution was here, and of course it was existing in racing. So what this meant was the cars did have, and of course this would vary from team to team, but the cars did have computer software on board, mostly for the engine management, because remember, manual gearbox, so you don't need a computer to control your throttle, for example. You don't need a computer to control your clutch and gear shift. The driver's doing that. But you do have a computer for engine maps and things of that nature, so there are computer systems on board. It is logging data. If you've got a transmitter on board, it does have the capacity to send it line of sight via radio signal back to the pits. So when the cars would pass by the pits, they would send a data burst, and then the teams would pick it up on the pit wall, and then they'd be able to get some information from the car. So that's what an antenna like that would be facilitating, in addition to the car-to-pit radio, as you'd be expecting. Continuing to move back, though, we've got side pods. Look at this. This bifurcated side pod with this big stiffener stay in the middle. Obviously, big time air feeding into the radiators back here. These turbocharged engines, they produced a lot of heat, which means that you need a lot of cooling. So these huge gulfs of radiator openings, that is supplying that inlet charge there for the cooling. So that'd be going into the radiators, which would be mounted probably about here, because you can see the back of the radiator matrix just discharging through this nacoduct out the back of the side pod. Through here as well, you've got an ancillary duct, which, who knows what this is feeding. I think this is, actually, yes, this is exactly what this is feeding. This is one of the turbocharger intakes, because you can see an air filter right there. That is wild, absolutely wild. But, yep, there's your intake, one of the intakes for the engine. Twin turbo engine, of course, so there's another one on the other side feeding all of that. Another couple of little ducts up top side. These are feeding probably toward the gearbox oil cooler, which is obviously right there. Rear suspension obviously looking quite similar to the front suspension. However, what do we have here? We have got a pull rod arrangement. You can see that we have the dampers here mounted vertically, and they're being actuated from underneath, so you can see how the force would be applied here. If this wheel is pushed up, it's going to pull on this 45-ish degree rod, and then it's going to be acting on the spring damper there, the McPherson style strut. So that is a pull rod rear suspension, very, very cool. And of course our big brake duct feeding into the wheel hub with a caliper and pad similarly sized to the ones that we saw up front. Interesting to note the caliper placement though, obviously they're up in about the 1-2 o'clock position on the rear. If we go back to the front, you can see that they are at about the 9 o'clock position. Nowadays, you tend to see the Formula One teams placing their brake calipers as low down as possible for center of gravity reasons. Obviously, that was not so much a concern on this car. Again, though, this is something that might have changed throughout the car's life, and I'm not all that familiar with how they did it. So that's all cool. Moving to the rear end, though, what have we got? Have a look. We have a diffuser. It is just a single level diffuser, but it is a diffuser with 2 strakes coming down from the bottom of the floor to the ground. And we also see these strange holes in the diffuser. What's going on here? All of you Formula One fans who just figured out what Grand Prix racing was 2 weeks ago, how is this possible? Explain this to me. I thought Red Bull invented blown diffusers yesterday. No, no, no. Here we are in 1986. Obviously, the real world, this is a Williams, and we have got the exhausts venting through the diffuser. This is a blown diffuser. Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen. This is something that's been going on for the better part of 40 years. So, yep, there it is, 1986, a blown diffuser from a turbocharged engine in this case, but there you go. You've got 4 outlet pipes there. Obviously, we have a V6 engine, so we have 2 banks of cylinders, and it's a twin turbo, so we have got 2 wastegate pipes coming off of each turbo, so we have got 4 outlets there. They are venting into the diffuser, which means at speed you are energizing the ambient flow that the car has worked through the under tray, and you're just accelerating that flow out. So, blown diffuser in 1986, it was a thing, and of course it has been recreated so nicely here by RaceSim Studio. There are a few other effects that you will see from these exhaust pipes as you're out on track. If you're running the content shaders patch, or the custom shaders patch, whatever it's actually called, custom shaders patch it is, you will see smoke coming out of these. You will also notice some of the replay cameras will pick this up, particularly if you happen to be driving this car in lower light conditions. The exhausts will glow. So the heat shielding around here will glow, bottom side and top side, and the pipes themselves will actually glow. So the exhaust pipes out from the engine as well as from the backside of the turbo, they will start to glow orange as revs come on and as you hold those revs on. So do take a look for that as you're watching your replays after you're driving this car. Otherwise, though, here at the rear end, we're not seeing anything that's all that foreign to, say, somebody who is familiar with road cars, really. The most exotic thing is the inboard dampers actuated from the pull rod. But beyond that, you've got, you've got the gearbox right here with your differential in there. So it's a gearbox and differential all integrated into one casement. Mounted longitudinally there, so you would call this the combined gearbox and differential a transaxle, so that's pretty common. Those of you who drive a front-wheel drive road car, you have a transaxle, so that's what this is as well. And modern Formula One cars also with a transaxle arrangement. Beyond that, top of the gearbox casing, this is really the top of the differential. Here are the oil lines for the gearbox oil cooler, and it's replete with its own little radiator, and you can even see that they have made radiator matrix textures here, replete with their own reflections. Looks fantastic. And across the top there you can see the quick disconnects there on the fluid couplings. Really cool, really, really cool. And then of course looking outboard there toward the brakes. Here is one of the brake lines, just zip-tied onto one of the upper wishbones. They have bothered to model the zip tie. Yes, they have. And we know this is the brake line because if we follow it, look, it goes into the caliper. RSS. Why do you do the things you do? I don't know, but I'm so glad that you do it. Speaking of brake lines, here is the brake line on the front. Zip tied to the lower wishbone in this case, and it goes into the caliper on the bottom side through its own little fitting. It's amazing. I love it. Intake for the turbo on the right-hand side. There's your air filter there. And that feeds directly into the center of the turbocharger. Fantastic. Because the engine is intaking from the ground here, and actually, this is something that I would have to criticize from this design. Not because it doesn't work, but if you're gonna... Oops, I hit the wrong button there. We'll get there. If you're going to intake your inlet charge from the ground here... That's the wrong button again. I am not doing so well today. But if you're going to intake your inlet charge from the ground level, you're gonna deal with a couple of things. One, we always talk about track temperature in motorsport, and there's a reason for that. It's asphalt. It's colored black. It absorbs heat from the sun. When air gets hot, its density decreases, and you can visually see this because the refractive index changes, and that causes the shimmer, if not the mirage effect, from a distance. The hot road mirage, where you see a reflection of the sky and it looks like there's a puddle on the ground. That's because the air very near the road surface is really hot, and it has a different index of refraction, so you get a total internal reflection, and you see the mirror image of the sky and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you know what I mean. But because the hot air is so close to the ground, if you're going to inlet that hot air, you're not getting as dense an inlet charge as you could get. Which means that it would actually pay dividends to intake from the top of the side pod. Obviously, these cars are not all that big, so there's not a huge difference between intaking from here versus intaking from up top. But there is a difference, and any little difference is going to mean power gains in this case. Even though it's a turbocharged engine where you're compressing that inlet air anyway, if you can start with denser air to begin with, then you can compress it even more. And you're going to have a slightly lower temperature when you pull it from up high, which means that you're going to make a little bit more power, because when you compress air, its temperature rises. So if you can get cooler air, and this is of course the rationale for an intercooler, but if you can get cooler air into the turbos and then cooler air post turbos, you've compressed the air, you've lowered its temperature as much as possible, which means that it's not going to put as much heat, delta heat, into your engine, which means that you're going to get better efficiency and you have a higher safety margin in terms of reliability. But I'm getting very geeky now. Be that as it may, since my brain apparently wants to do it anyway, let's go in the cockpit now? Yes, okay, we're in the cockpit. Wait for it. Wait. What are you doing? What are you doing? Come on. Okay, you're not going in the cockpit. Can we go in the cockpit now? Almost there? Yes, okay, now we're in the cockpit. That's awfully strange, but we're in the cockpit now. This is about the height that you're going to be at when you drive the car. So this is pretty much the view that you could expect to see. You've got great visibility in the mirrors on both sides. You've got, obviously, your steering wheel here, which has 900 buttons on it and 5 computers. No, it doesn't. Again, 1986. We've got 2 switches on the steering wheel. One, I assume, is an engine kill, and another, I assume, is the pit-to-car radio, car-to-pit radio, whatever you want to say. It's the thing there you say, Bono, my tires are dead, but almost 40 years ago. Be that as it may, that's what you've got. It's brilliant in here. It is just really basic. It's almost entirely analog. There is a little digital display, as you can see there, from between the sides of the steering wheel. You do have a little screen that you'll see come to life later, but it's just you, some basic controls, and 1,200 horsepower behind you. So this is the office, and it's a brilliant place to be. If we go back into our free cam, you can see that we have got ourselves a lot of detail in here. This is the LCD screen, which is completely dead at the moment, but that'll come to life later. This is our tachometer. We are measuring in, obviously, RPM times 1,000, and you can see we go up to 13 and a half. Yeah, 13 and a half or 13 and a quarter, about that. We redline at about 12.4 in this engine, so we'll never get up into the 13 range unless you really mess up a downshift. But you can see that we have got this red triangle in the tach at about 95 through about 10.5. Doesn't mean anything. Don't worry about it. That's just where if you pop an upshift when you're in the red zone there, you get a really nice trill on the engine when the next gear comes in. So remember that for your replays. But beyond that, you've got your tack, and its attack, it's just what it is. But it also does this. Yep. You can flip the tachometer around if you want, and the reason why you would do this is if we pull back a little bit, back up to roughly the height that we're driving from, you'll see that that red zone, it's kind of obscured by the steering wheel, but if we flip it around, and when we're in setup we'll show this better, but you can move this tack to any rotational position that you want. So I tend to move this so that the red area is toward the bottom right, because that's where my eyes generally tend to go. So that just lets me know when I see that white needle fly by, particularly in the lower gears, hey, you're getting up closer to the red line. So I like that. That's one of the interesting details that RSS have chosen to include with this car. However, returning to the cockpit, what do we have here? First of all, we've got the chassis plate, Race Sim Studio, RSSC, London, UK, chassis number RSS860017. Fantastic. I love their chassis plates. And this lever here, this is not the gear lever, this is for the front anti-roll bar. So you can see that there. This knob would be for brake bias, I presume. And then up top you got a little switch panel for the rain light. The ISOL, probably one of the ignition things. And then the ignition switch itself. Fire bottle, real cool. On this side you've just got a couple of switches for the display. And then over here you got this strange lever that nobody seems to know what it does. I hear that it's what swaps cogs around in the gearbox, but, you know, I'm not sure because it's literally current year. Don't know what a manual gearbox is anymore these days, do we? However, you can see there's the carbon weave in the monocoque. This is a carbon monocoque, of course, so obviously we need that detail there, and Race Sim Studio have given it to us. Very, very nice. Carbon texturing on the seat as well, and the seat belts very nicely done, with that center hub so that the driver can just pop them all off at once if he needs to get out in a hurry. Moving down, there's the fire bottle, the pressurized bottle full of extinguishing agent. It's cool. And then we get into this is a manifold here from the fire bottle, so that will send extinguisher to the engine bay, and then some through the cockpit. And then we get into the pedals here. Obviously, throttle, brake, and clutch. The pedals don't move on this car, unlike some other Race Sim Studio products more recently. But the driver's legs are animated on this car, and you'll see that when we're out on track as well as in some of the replay angles. So the driver's legs move, the pedals don't, but obviously when you're driving, you have no chance of ever seeing that anyway. But they have bothered to model it because of course they did. Backside of the steering wheel. Very, very nice, done in that brushed aluminum. And then the rim is lined with, looks like suede to me. Quick release collar. And then there you go, just two switches on the front side of the steering wheel, and that's about it. So that's really, really cool. We pop out of the cockpit and you see what's going on there. It's really fantastic to see all of the things that they have done on this car, inside and out, and of course there is nobody better at this than Race Sim Studio. I have lost my cursor, so we're going to have to come out and come back in, but we've got a number of skins that are available here as is from Race Sim Studio, so we'll take a look at those in a moment. As we were saying, we have got a number of skins available with this car. This one here, it is quite obviously a Ferrari lookalike. We have got Gricko as the name there on the number 47 car. Yes, that's me. Race Sim Studio, once again, for whatever reason, apparently these people still like me. They have elected to put my name on one of these cars, and for that I am eternally grateful, and I extend my gratitude once again to Race Sim Studio for so doing. However, we have got a number of other skins available. We have got number 28 in the same livery. This is driven by someone by the name of Andre. I think you're Polish. Pretty sure you're Polish. Probably destroyed your name. I'm sorry. Here we have got Herr Edelmann. I know how to pronounce German words for the most part. Edelmann, yes, with the parody Zack Speed livery. I like that. Very, very cool. And then the number 81 car. Well, oh dear, you're also Polish. Guzik, I think. Yes. Don't know if I've ever seen you in the Racing Studio Discord, but if I've talked to you before, I'm sorry for not recognizing your name, but you're on a cool-looking car nonetheless. Very, very cool. Heading back now through the 47th. There we go at number 20. This is a Benetton look-alike. And they've bothered to go through the trouble of coloring the sidewalls on the tires in the funny colors that Benetton actually did in this era. So that looks really cool. I like all of that. Mr. Yurik, cool. And then Mr. Price here on the number 9 Benetton look-alike. McLaren look-alike. This is the Portuguese Grand Prix look-alike for Mr. Duran. Very, very cool. And another McLaren look-alike. This is Herr Haumann. Yes. So we've got the Dayglow yellow for the Portuguese Grand Prix, and we have got the Dayglow red for everywhere else. Cool. Next one, this is a Williams look-alike, quite obviously. Jenicek, very cool. And we have got number 21, the red 21, obviously a parody of the red 5 that Nigel Mansell would have done. Mr. Rosado driving this car. So the names that you see on these cars, I believe all of them are Race Sim Studio supporters, and obviously they've bothered to put me on one of them, and for that I am very pleased as well. So thank you to Race Sim Studio for putting me on yet another one of these cars. And this livery, as well as the helmet that they've chosen to give me, basically identical to the one that you will see on the number 47 car for the Formula 1990 V12 as well. So I like that continuity, really, and it looked good then and it looks good now, so that's where we are. And again, really, it's just cool to see yourself on one of these products, to drive a car with your own name on it in the sim. It's a little bit surreal. But be that as it may, enough blabbering from me here in showroom. We've got to drive this thing. Where are we going to go? I don't know. You're about to find out, though. Welcome to Austria. Yes, I figured we would go here because I did a first look video with this car at Brands Hatch, which is a place where this car actually would have raced. However, we also have some historical ties to the Österreich, which this is and is not, because obviously in the 90s, this place had a reprofile into its current configuration, but it still covers some of the same tarmac, so it's close enough. But really, the reason for this is this car and this track fit together very nicely because the configuration of this circuit is very accommodating to a car like this, because these kinds of cars are not so much into the high-performance, high-speed corners that more modern cars are into, although it can do them. It's not its favorite thing in the world. This car is all about big power delivery, high acceleration, and hitting the brakes as late as you dare. So that's what this track is, and it's still one of the reasons why this is one of the few tracks that generally produces decent racing, even in the modern era. So I like it, and I think it fits this car well, so we're here. But just taking a look around at this car sitting here in the pit lane, now all loaded up in the game proper, you can see some of the reflections a little bit more nicely in their natural habitat. And you can also see how the light is falling on all of the textures and materials here. It looks fantastic, just as it did in showroom. All of the features that we saw there are here, and, well, it still looks utterly wonderful. Very, very cool. I like in the shadowed side, you can get a little bit of a better sense of the radiator matrices in terms of what they look like, their depth and all that kind of thing. Looks great. And, of course, the reflections of our pit lane stuff. There it is. You can see it in the side pod. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic to see it here. Looks great. And, of course, we can see a little bit more. We'll go into our cockpit here, and we'll do our cockpit checkout, just generally what we see in here with everything alive and the driver in position. This is the driving position that we'll be in. And really not a whole lot to see in here beyond what we saw in showroom. In fact, there's a little bit less that's visible because, well, the driver is in here now. However, I can demonstrate. You can see the driver's legs do move on the throttle, brake, and clutch, believe it or not. So we have got All 3 pedal inputs modeled here in terms of what the driver can do. Looks really cool. Going from the brake to the throttle, you can see that there is actually a little bit of a shift that his right leg does because he's lined up with the brake pedal by default. But as you get onto the throttle, he shifts over initially, and then you get into the throttle application. You throttle and brake at the same time, he just defaults to the brake application. So that's what you could expect. But the clutch is always the left leg, and that's really, really cool. In the center there, you can see our screen. That is now alive because we've got the car switched on. Across the top, you're going to see our speed readout in kilometers per hour. To the left of that, where you've got the 3 dashes, you're then going to see our delta as we set different laps throughout the session. Below that, the F0, that is the fuel level at 0 liters, because we want to keep the engine quiet. And then, obviously, the clock that's ticking by, that is our current lap time. And then we have got our gear position indicator to the right of that. Obviously, we are in neutral, and then it's all the way up through the box from gears 1 to 6. And we even have reverse, but hopefully you don't have to use reverse. Bottom line of all of that, we have got our turbo boost gauge in terms of how much boost we have dialed up. It's currently defaulted to 60%. We can bring that down to 0 or all the way up to 100 on the fly here in the cockpit. In the center there on the bottom line, we have got our boost pressure. So right now 0.0 obviously, so that's an ambient. And it will go all the way up to 4.0 because that is our maximum boost level. And then just a little bit out of sight there because it's in shadow. Move the steering wheel a little bit there. There we go. We see P1, that is our position in the race at the moment, or whatever session we're in, because it's just a practice session. So that's cool, and that's all the instrumentation we have here in the cockpit, bar the tachometer, which we took a look at in showroom. Back now into the setup screen, what do we have going on in here? Well, first of all, our gear display, 1st through 6th gear plus final drive, all displayed here. Default values for all the ratios are shown. You are going to have to be playing with this out of the gate because 298 clicks in 6th gear is just too slow because you will max this thing out very quickly at that level. So you're going to be wanting to lengthen 6th gear quite substantially, if not the final drive altogether. Tires, we have got 4 tire compounds to choose from. Defaults to the mediums, but we have hards, mediums, softs, and qualifying tires. Qualifying tires are obviously the stickiest and the fastest over a single lap, but they are the least durable. So if the car suddenly becomes basically a barrel of bricks to drive after 2 or 3 laps on the qualies, that's why you need to put a proper race tire on it. Tire pressures default to 20 psi all around. Maximum tire pressure that we can dial up is 35, and the minimum that we can dial in is 18 on the front, and that is the same on the rears. So 20 psi is your default there. Fuel, we have zeroed it out to keep the engine quiet, but our fuel capacity here is 195 liters, and of course that fires the engine up momentarily. Electronics, the only electronic display we have got here is turbocharger boost percentage here. It defaults to 60%, really. I don't know why it was at 50 there, but it defaults to 60, and of course, as we demonstrated from the cockpit, we can adjust this on the fly between 0 and 100. So, effectively, you have got maybe 500 horsepower, probably a bit less than that, actually, because the car is really slow at 0%. And then when you're up to 100%, you've got 1,200 horsepower. So all of the performance figures that we were talking about in showroom, they're derived from 100% boost. So obviously your results may vary depending on what boost level you have got. We will demonstrate this out on track, but in general, you can expect to be able to run the car as long as you want at boost levels between 0 and 60%. As you start to get into 70%, things are going to become a little bit touch and go in terms of doing damage to the engine. 70%, you can still run this for a very long time. Obviously, your fuel consumption is going to go up, and that's still going to be your biggest mitigating factor at 70%. But 70% is basically maximum race boost. Anything at 80% and above, now you're going to be doing damage to the engine, and you will blow the thing up before long. And obviously, that only gets worse as you go through 90 and 100%. So, to be safe, I would recommend running this at 60% boost maximum if you need it to run for a very long time. Otherwise, go into 70 and then
basically for qualifying only, do you want to be anywhere near 100 unless you are making an isolated move in a race, like an overtake, for example. So keep that in mind. Aerodynamics, front wing, and rear wing beam. What do we mean by this? We'll head out of the car once again. Rear wing beam, that's the beam wing. We can put it on or take it off. Rear wing main plane. We do not have any visible change in the angle of attack on the rear wing, but the effects are, of course, duly modeled. However, on the front wing, as we showed in showroom, you can see that the angle of attack does indeed change visually with the different settings that we dial in. So that's cool to see, and of course, all duly modeled aerodynamically. Brakes, brake bias, and brake power default values are shown. I tend to like my brake bias a little bit farther forward than this, but this is obviously quite drivable. Brake power at 100%. You can bring it all the way up to 115 if you really want to, but I keep it at 100 because it's just what it does. If you want your brakes to be less effective for whatever reason, it goes down to 70%, so rather wide range of adjustment there on the brakes if you so desire. Drivetrain, these are your differential settings in power, coast, and preload with the default values shown. I like to open up a diff, so I basically ratchet all these things down to minimum. Maximum diff preload you can call up is 200 Newton meters. So there you go. We'll bring this back up to default values for the moment. Suspension, the alignments in camber and toe on all four corners, default values shown. Suspension screen number 2, these are your adjustments for the anti-roll bars, wheel rates, and ride heights and travel ranges, front and rear, for all four corners. Dampers, the bound and rebound, fast and slow on all four corners there, and your bump stops for all four corners. So, cool. You don't, sure I am not giving you bad information here, nope, you do not have explicit third spring adjustments, it would appear. But you do have pretty substantial adjustments on all four corners. Various, the steer assist, leave this alone, I do anyway. And then visuals, tacho position. You can change the position of the tachometer rotationally, as we saw in showroom, and you can see as I ramp this through its settings that the tachometer will flip around. So basically, depending on where your eye position is and where your eyes tend to be a little bit more sensitive to, I guess, changes in color or motion through your peripheral vision, depending on your preference there. This is where you want it. It's where you want to put that red triangular section there on the tachometer. I tend to like steps 8 or 9, just because I can still see before the red line, in the red line, and then beyond the red line, because, again, we're revving to beyond 12,000. So when I see the needle pass the triangular section there, I know that we are getting up close to where this thing needs to be. So we are on default setup here. I'm just going to confirm that. So default with 60% turbo, there we go. I'm going to flip the tachometer to step 9 where I like it. We are utterly full of fuel. There it is. And we're on the medium tires, so this is 100% default setup. And we are going to get out on track and see what this thing does here on default. I am just going to bring the turbocharger down to 0 so that we can get ourselves ready. So tires have not been in the blankets, so they are at ambient. So we have got to warm things up. A tight pit exit here at Austria. Just going to get into all the gears. So we've got the car awake, and of course you can see we are floored on the throttle. And we have very little power, particularly in the higher gears, because we've got no boost pressure. However, as your first taste of the engine actually running under load, sounds are very, very nice already. Another thing that's very, very nice is this view out of the cockpit. It's great in here. The tachometer, of course, is partially obscured by the steering wheel, but it doesn't really matter because you're only concerned with, like, the last quarter of it. So that's what you put in your field of view. And again, really just very carefully bring the tires in. These are the medium, so you don't really have to worry about scuffing them up too bad, because they will last you a while. Very, very nice. 159 kilometers per hour down the start-finish straight. Yeah, this thing does not have a lot of power without that boost dialed up. Again, it's just a 1.5 liter engine, and most of its potential is just being vented to atmosphere right now. So if for whatever reason you dial this thing in, and you go to drive it for the first time, and you're just hitting the gas and not much is happening, that's why. So this should not happen off default. Now, at such low speeds, there's not an awful lot that you can divine about the overall driving characteristics. The gearbox, though, is absolutely wonderful. Using my Thrustmaster TSPC rim here, I've got the Ferrari 430 Challenge rim dialed up. Very nice shape. It's a perfectly circular rim, and it's pretty nice diameter as well. Very small, much like the steering wheel in this actual car would have been. Married up to the TH8A shifter, of course. Makes for a wonderful experience. Alright, what do you say we dial up some boost? Let's give it 50%. There's the turbo. Alright, so that lap was 1:50. This lap's going to be quicker. Remember, we're also full of fuel. All right, there's some heat going into the brakes. That's what we needed. All right. Brakes are happy now. And the car is very heavy right now because we are full of fuel to the tune of 192 liters. Bit of understeer setting in there already. Got to be careful. And the lap time is, wait for it, 1:25.192. Okay. So we're sitting here at 50% boost. I would say we're most likely around, I don't know, 600-ish horsepower at this point, which really feels tremendous. Of course, the car only weighs 610 kilos. Not right now because we're loaded with fuel. But theoretically a 1-to-1 power to weight ratio at this point. It's not entirely accurate right now though because of the fuel load. But to put it into perspective, we are at 50% of what the engine theoretically can give us. We are already comparable in terms of performance to a modern Formula 2 car. This thing's from 1986, okay? It is substantially older than a modern Formula 2 car, and we are already knocking on the door of its performance on paper anyway. .124, 308. Times are coming down. All right, tail coming out there a little bit. Tail coming out there again. I love the gearbox. Again, it's just a manual gearbox. There's nothing special about that. But what is special about it is when it's married up to something with this performance potential. Easy for me to say. Car is already having an impact, quite obviously. You can just pop downshifts like there's no tomorrow. The upshifts can be clutchless if you want, as can be the downshifts, but it's a little bit harder to do that reliably. Let's get into race boost. 70%, here we go. This is the maximum boost pressure that you can run and maintain reliability. And you can see already what happens. There we go. Oh yeah. Careful on the throttle coming out of the slow stuff. There's 12,000 revs. I do not know what the dyno curve looks like at 70% versus 100%. It feels like max power, as I go off because I'm looking at the tachometer, it feels like max power is coming in a little bit earlier in the rev range at lower boost pressures than 100%. Hence, I'm still shifting a bit earlier than I strictly need to. But I am still benefiting from the wonders of boost. Oh, yep, tail coming out. That's what I mean about the thing dancing in a straight line, because, yeah, you expect it to break free coming out of the corners, but down the straights, it's still doing it. Okay, second gear here. There's the boost. All right, looking good. Come on, get it to the apex, a little bit of understeer there. Continuing to break free on the exit. Just got to modulate that power application. There we go. Right. Now give me power to the line, come on. 119.446, okay. So, we mentioned in showroom that we might want to talk about some of the more unique aspects of driving this car. Now, obviously, it's turbocharged, quite heavily so. So that means just in and of itself that the way that it delivers its power is quite non-linear. You just run into a wall of boost the higher up you get in the rev range, and of course at some point, this car tends to be around 9,000 revs or so, where the boost really starts to come in. And then your amount of power available just effectively doubles. So that's obviously something very important to keep in mind. When you start to crack the throttle on mid-corner, you're not going to have much of a response. However, by the time you get out of the corner, you've got twice the power that you thought you did, and that's when the boost is coming in. So you have to become very aware, very early on, of where the boost is. If you don't do that, this car is just going to spit you off all the time. So that's point one. Point two is related to how the power comes in, related to the torque curve. How do you use the gearbox in this car? You saw there coming out of turn one, I short shifted, basically 2, 3, 4 very quickly. You do not have to use this gearbox sequentially, even though I pretty much have been using this gearbox sequentially. You can obviously skip gears if you know that you've got sufficient margin between one gear and the next. You're not going to over-rev the thing, or you're not going to bog it down going up. You can do that, so notice 4, 3, 2 from 6th, completely bypassing 5th. That's not a problem. You can do that if you want. The other thing is, do not be afraid of short shifting. I know in normally aspirated cars, you generally want to exploit the full amount of revs available in each gear. And of course, that's generally true with a car like this as well. However, it is not strictly necessary when it comes to self-preservation. So if you're going to get wheel spin in 3rd or 4th gear, don't be afraid to bail out of them a little bit early. Nothing wrong with short shifting. The car recovers that boost and those revs so quickly that you can effectively just skip gears, and it doesn't much matter. Like here, I'm going to go straight into 4th. Little bit of a bog down, but it doesn't matter, okay? So your driving technique can change a little bit in a car like this because you just have so much power available. Don't feel married to doing everything in a robotic binary sort of fashion. It's not a robotic binary sort of car. It's very much an almost organic, almost living being. So trust your instincts more than your training, I would say, because this thing, it's still from an era where the final arbiter of everything was not necessarily the stopwatch. It was still the thing with the brain sitting between the tires, which is something that I feel that motorsport in general, particularly Formula One, has gotten away from recently. But the human input and the human instinct and the human intuition meant an awful lot for the way that the cars ultimately were designed and the way they ultimately were set up in this era. And that, I believe, really comes through with what RSS have been able to do with this car. It could not be any more different from the Formula Hybrid series. Formula Hybrid 2023, as good a car as it is, I can't help but feel underwhelmed every time I drive it because it's just so good that it never surprises you. You want to do a Grand Prix distance at breakneck speeds in that thing? Yeah, it'll do it. All day long, no problem. But you can't get the tail out. It's not going to surprise you coming out of a low-speed corner and say, hey, here's 1,200 horsepower, like this one will. This has more horsepower than that does. Obviously, it's never going to have a prayer of competing with it in terms of lap time, but the way that it makes you feel and the things that you have to do to keep it in line, because you are not 100% in charge of what's going on here, that's what makes this car so much more exciting, in my opinion. And if you're used to one of the newer cars, one of the newer Formula Hybrid installments, well, that's going to be a little bit of a change in driving philosophy for you. So back to the pits with us after that first run. We took it up to 70% boost, and obviously that really is quite enough because, well, it still does absolutely fantastic things at 70% boost. But we were on the medium tires. We had the highest possible fuel load, so we didn't really set the world alight in terms of lap times. Our best lap was a 1:19.446. Okay, not bad, but, we could go several seconds a lap quicker if we would, take out some fuel. And, of course, put those wonderful hot and sticky qualifying tires on all four corners of this thing. So I think that we probably should have a thought about doing just that. Right, so back into the pits with us, the setup screen. We are gonna get this thing set up the way that I currently like it set up, with what we would call nearest makes no difference a qualifying setup. So we've got the qualifying tires fitted, so the softest available tires, but of course the least durable. I'm not going to touch tire pressures. 100% turbo dialed in there. We will just zero that out for the moment. Got the beam wing on. Got a little bit off of the front wing, the rear wing not touched. And then go a little bit forward on the brake bias. The diff is opened up. It's probably the biggest adjustment that we've made. And everything else is pretty much default there. So really, the difference is going to be with the turbocharger and with the fuel level, as well as the tire compound. So we will, let's see, how much fuel should we put in here? Let's go for, let's do 20 liters because we'll burn a little bit, warming the car up. And then we will get out on track here and see what's going on. Right, so once again, the boost pressure is at 0, so we're not going to have much power, but that's okay because we need to be careful warming these tires up. It does not take very much to warm up these qualifying tires, and that's okay because they do not last very long anyway. So they have a very fast warm-up, and then they do not have all that much to give you beyond a lap or two. Alright, we'll put some heat into them here. These long corners, that's good. That's good. Give me some boost. We're 70%. Alright, here we go. Let's go for a flyer, 100% boost dialed up. Here's 1,200 horsepower. All right. There's 300 clicks. Second gear into turn 1. Feed the power in. And you can see the damage we're doing to the engine here, but it does not have to last long. There's first gear. Brakes are not entirely happy yet. See how easy it is to miss a gear there on the upshift. Give me an apex, give me an exit, give me a short shift. All right. Give me boost, there's the boost. Give me boost again, there we go. All right. All right, 1,200 horsepower to the line. time is a 1:13.384. On our second and last flyer, because after this lap the tires will be gone. Still a little difficult to get it stopped into turn 2. Don't call it turn 3. All right. Those rears are still holding on somehow. There's the power. And give it the beans, all right. And to the line, what do we have? That's a 1:12.303. And now we've got to give it a break. Because the tires are officially dead. I mean, not entirely officially dead. They probably have got one more lap in them, but the peak performance is gone. But that is full power in this thing. It'll do 112s without trying too hard. That's pretty cool. And in terms of the Race Sim Studio lineup, it is the most powerful car that they have ever made. So it's got that going for it as well. I say add a little bit of gas and give me another set of qualifying tires, and we will do that one more time. Show you what a pit stop looks like here. It takes a little while. But there we go. All right. Wheels are bolted up. Right, at 50% power. Trying to be careful not to spin the wheels with the tires not warmed up yet. That will wreck them. Brakes are still pretty good temperature-wise. All right, let's go to max race boost. And let's go to max power now. All right, stand by. All right, let's see what we can do. All right, so far so good. Making it a little bit easier into turn 2. Pushing the braking a little bit more there. Right. So far, so good. A little bit wide, but track limits don't exist. Give us one more lap. 112.372. Okay, got a little crossed up there under braking. But that's okay, we actually gained time somehow. The car is just always moving around. It does not let you rest or linger anywhere. And that's exactly what you want from a car like this. Ah, had to miss that gear. Of course I did. 112.157. Push it a little bit harder for one more lap. We are out of the sweet spot of the tires, though. I can't keep missing gears. That's how you give away fast laps. Go 111.645. Okay. And now we've got to give that a break. You see what I mean, though? The car just comes alive at max boost like that, and then it just eggs you on. But, it is a fair weather friend. The moment that you get any sort of problem brewing, whether it's with you or it's just the fact that the tires are going off, its demeanor changes immediately, and then it becomes an exercise in self-preservation. All right. Well. back in the pits with us. We are getting our brains back inside our heads. That's what it does at full boost on qualifying tires. That's the fastest this car can be, at least set up the way it is around this track on this day with this very unqualified person in the cockpit. So that's what it can do. That's what everybody wants to do with it. However, it's not something that you can do for very long. It is incredibly taxing on the tires, the brakes, the engine, and of course you, because to drive this car that fast, I mean, just look at it. It is this little bullet on wheels. It's got a short wheelbase, which means it's going to be twitchy as anything. It does not have an awful lot of aero grip to help you in the higher speed stuff. It's just got these big fat tires and 1,200 horsepower underneath this glorious engine cover. And you need to just figure out how to monitor and meter all of that performance so that the car will serve the means to your ends. That's about it. This is a constant struggle of finding performance, but also making sure that you go home at the end of the day. That's what driving this car is like. It is effectively a combat situation to drive this car fast, and it is absolutely spectacular that we're able to have this in Assetto Corsa. The closest that we've been able to get in this sim anyway for the longest time has been the Lotus 98T, which is a lot of fun in its own right, but Assetto Corsa is 10 years old this year. The Lotus 98T was one of the first cars to come to this game, so yeah, it's pretty old. This brings that experience and refines it, given the state of the art here in 2023 from one of the best firms ever to come to sim racing modding on the whole. It's really spectacular. It's definitely something that, even if, let's say, the turbo era is not something that particularly piques your interest, it's absolutely something that you need to look at, and you owe it to yourself to give this car a go, because it is so much fun, first of all, to drive. It's completely different from anything else in the Race Sim Studio lineup. Even Formula 1990 V12, it's a completely different flavor, despite being similar in many regards in terms of, first of all, the time the car is from, as well as macrocosmically, how does it actually do its bidding through high-speed corners and things like that. It's just so much less refined, and it is so much more analog, even from a car only 4 years newer. You really need to have a go in this thing to experience it for yourself and to make the assessment for yourself. It's not going to be the kind of car that most people will like, I think, only because it's so difficult to get your head around this thing. If you're good in a modern car, it bears very little play on how you will get on with this. It is just a fundamentally different experience. The insane Lamborghini Gallardo, the turbocharged thing, that's stock in Assetto Corsa, the thing that's got like 1,200 horsepower. Yeah, it gives you a sense of how much straight line speed this thing has, but when you marry it up with the performance under braking, with the tires, with the aero and the really high-speed stuff, you're really talking about a very unique package here. And it's something that you can only experience with Formula 1986 V6 by Race Sim Studio. Absolutely, go get it. These guys, first of all, they deserve all of the compensation that you can give them, be it financially or otherwise, because they are a great bunch of guys, and they are doing the Lord's work here in Assetto Corsa. And again, this is a brilliant addition to their lineup. Not one that I was expecting, but I am so glad that they've done it, and I'm so glad that it's here, because it's quickly become one of my favorite things ever, and I don't see that changing for any time soon to come. Right with RSS 2000 and RSS 1990, they are, I think, now 3 cars in my ultimate pantheon of Assetto Corsa experiences. You've got to have this one to complete that, and it is just fantastic. Go get it and give it a go yourselves, because you will absolutely be missing out on something spectacular if you pass this one up. However, that about does it for me here today. Hot laps here from Austria are to follow from onboard, as well as trackside cameras, so you can hear everything that's going on with these wonderful sounds that we haven't talked all that much about, but, you know, talking over them. But car sounds great inside and out. Keep an eye out for a couple of little details during the replays. You'll see the car trailing sparks as it bottoms, as you would expect. But also take a look around the exhaust and the diffuser in... show you where those are, just to remind you. the exhausts down here in the diffuser. Take a look for them because they will be glowing, and you might be able to see that. You'll also see some backfire on overrun, effects like that going on. So keep an eye out for all of that because it looks absolutely spectacular, and it's wonderful to see little details like that continuing to feature here on Racing Studio products, despite them not being all that noticeable a lot of the time. So stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. Also, a reminder to everyone, there will be a pinned comment here in the comment section beneath this video. If anybody wants to ask some questions regarding my podcast, A Post Formula World, I have delayed the July edition of that because I didn't get all that much engagement on the last episode, but if you would like to ask questions and have them featured in A Post Formula World, please reply to the pinned comment here underneath this video. Stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.
Thank you.